Episode 3 of Season 2 of The Mandalorian's just hit Disney+, but we're going to do 2 reviews in one show. Was that enough numbers for you? Let's find out. Hey everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and I am reviewing the last 2 episodes of The Mandalorian. I didn't do a review last week because we got to the end of the episode, and I thought, that kind of felt like the first half of what seems like a 2-part episode, so I ended up waiting to see what was going to happen this week, and I'm glad I did because I think I've got enough to say about these 2 together. I don't know how much I would have had to say about just last week's show alone. So, as I've done before, I'm going to have some short, spoiler-free thoughts, and then I'm going to get into some heavy spoilers both for last week's episode and this week's episode. So, you can stay tuned right now if you haven't watched either of those episodes, and then I will give you the word when to tune out when I'm going to start doing spoilers. So, let's first rewind a little bit back in time to last week's episode, which was called The Passenger. The Passenger was directed by Peyton Reed, and you can see some of the comic sensibility that he brought to the Ant-Man films in the MCU, but this was also very much a creature feature, even more so than the big crate dragon battle in the first episode of the season. Fun fact about me, my 2 biggest fears, and I'm not making this up, in order, number 2, insects, number 1, frogs. So I had a lot of fun with last week's episode because it was like going into a horror show of my own psyche as that episode went on. It started to feel personal. It started to feel like a personal attack on me. Last week's episode was the first one so far that felt to me like it was incomplete. Like they had split it into 2 for reasons that I wasn't exactly sure of because last week's episode was 40 minutes. This week's episode's about 35 minutes. So episode 2 I enjoyed, but I really tied it to episode 3, and that was the episode that just premiered on Disney+. This one is called The Heiress, and it's directed by Bryce Dallas Howard. And we do follow up on the conclusion of last week and kind of wrap up that storyline a little bit. And then we meet a bunch of new characters, or at least they were new to me. And I think that's where, when we get into the spoiler section, I really want to talk about where the show's going, where it has its roots, and how we can all react to it as Star Wars fans of different degrees and different types. The lore is now, it's been kind of like pounding at the door. This week, the door was kicked open because there were so many names dropped and hints made at where this franchise is going to go, what it's going to revisit from the past, and it was stuff that I was seeing for the first time, a lot of it. Of course, I did a little bit of research after the show to be like, oh, okay, I see. Oh, okay, this is a reference to that, or this is a reference to this. But this one episode could very well be, when we look back on this season and maybe the entire series, the hinge point where we really start to find out what The Mandalorian is going to do with its storylines, both this season and perhaps going forward into future seasons. For the first time, The Mandalorian might be leaving me behind a little bit, or at least I need to play a little bit of catch up. And so we're going to talk about that in a second. But, my non-spoiler thoughts aren't very long because it's just a lot of fun to talk about this show, and I do want people to discover it as they go. So, if you just want to know my first reactions to these episodes, I would say 2 I enjoyed, but it felt like the first half of a different episode. As part of episode 3, I still enjoyed these episodes, but I am starting to kind of wonder whether the fabric of the show is going to get a little too dense. I don't think it's going to. But it's the first time that question has popped into my head. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts. Consider this your spoiler warning for episodes 2 and 3 of season 2 of The Mandalorian, and then we will jump into spoiler thoughts for these 2 episodes. Okay, let's rewind a little bit to last week's episode of The Passenger, directed by Peyton Reed. And, like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of thoughts about it. Of course, the big thing that's exploded is regarding the child and eating the eggs, which has been was played as a comic moment on the show, but then I guess has stirred up some controversy. And listen, I understand. I understand that people are sensitive to different things. It didn't really strike me. It was very darkly comic. It was maybe more of a dark comedic beat than we've seen. It definitely got a reaction while we were watching it last week, just kind of like, oh, Baby Yoda, even though that's not his name. I know it's the child, but that's what I say. I look at the TV and I go, Baby Yoda, that's not right. Did it strike me as over the line in any way? It didn't strike me that way, and I guess people certainly have the right to react to things differently, but it didn't seem like the show was intentionally going out of its way to be insensitive. It really did just strike me as a very darkly humorous moment. One that I was wondering if it was going to pay off in this next episode, and it didn't really. There was some speculation like, oh, maybe he's just storing the eggs. Nah, man, it looks like Baby Yoda just likes to throw down on some frog eggs. Listen, if I wasn't so mortally terrified of him, maybe I could see where he was coming from. Then we had the huge fight on the Kingdom of the Ice Spiders, and the other thing that I love is the Razor Crest, particularly this season, and just the beating that it's taken. You have this crash into the ice planet and going down, and then it gets landed on by the big queen ice spider, and it's got holes in the hull and everything. They've got to ride in the cockpit because the space is getting vented out of the hull. And then this week, you land, and I have to say, the comedic timing on that beat where they're coming down through the atmosphere, just, a million miles a minute, and then he pulls up and is able to stop right above the landing pad, and that timing on the engine cutting out and the ship just tipping into the water. That was a laugh out loud moment. I think that was well executed. It started the show off with a laugh, so you wonder like, okay, is this going to be more of a humorous episode? But this episode took a little bit more of a serious turn. Of course, we had the Mandalorian on the search for other Mandalorians. That was the whole reason that he was agreeing to ferry the frog lady and the frog eggs to this planet. And then he finds them. And this is where I think the discussion for me as a Star Wars fan splits a little bit from the experience that a lot of other people have had, because I've seen all the Star Wars movies numerous times. I enjoy a good number of them. I've never taken that dive into the TV shows, into Clone Wars and Rebels, into the books, etc. And so for me, this was the first time I'm seeing Bo-Katan, who is played by Katie Sackhoff. When she showed up, I just thought, cool. First of all, I love Katie Sackhoff. I think she was great in Battlestar Galactica. I just think that she has a great presence, and she brought a great presence to that role. And I liked this idea that, we have a main character and, he thinks that there's one way to be a Mandalorian. And then you have this different group that he meets. I love that conflict between them. Now, I don't know any of that backstory. For me, this is just an interesting turn for this show to take, to introduce these characters, to introduce these other Mandalorians. And so that was exciting. And then only afterwards did I find out that there's all this other stuff to learn. And then the Darksaber and wanting to retake Mandalore, that this all ties into this, to the lore of Star Wars that's been built over these last couple decades. And first of all, I think for Star Wars, that's great. Because what it does is it meshes everything together in a way that I think excites a lot of fans. And right now, what it's doing is it's driving me towards other Star Wars things that I haven't seen. That drives me towards saying, like, you know what? I should go learn more about these characters, because I am going to have a different understanding and a richer understanding for a lot of these characters. But, what worries me, there's two things that worry me. One of them is that for people like me who don't know the lore from other Star Wars shows, that this show might get a little too dense with it, and you'll feel like you're being left behind. Now, that has not happened with me yet. I didn't need to know all this other stuff from before to understand what was going on in this show. So as long as they're able to balance those two things, to keep people like me that haven't seen Clone Wars and the animated shows, etc., on board without feeling like they're being left behind, and also to keep the hardcore fans who do know all that stuff on board by not being didactic about it and by not having to over-explain it and make it feel like they are just sitting through required explanation for dummies like me, then I think the show is going to continue to succeed. The other danger that I think that is happening is the danger of the fandom itself splitting, because, when I reviewed episode 1, I talked about the crate dragon and the sound that the crate dragon made, and how that was the same sound that Obi-Wan Kenobi made in Star Wars: A New Hope. And I got a lot of people that were like tweeting me and leaving comments and stuff like, well, yeah, we've known that. We've known that for decades. That was established in this or this or that and the other. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But like, let us discover that too. Let those of us who've experienced Star Wars in a different way discover that too. I didn't play Knights of the Old Republic. I didn't read the Star Wars novelizations from the 70s or 80s, so I don't know all of that stuff. There's going to be 5,000 other videos that come out about this episode that tell you everything you need to know about bo-katan and go into how this paid off, different parts of the storyline, etc. Because that's the perspective that those reviewers and commenters and stuff are coming from. I'm coming from a different perspective, but I don't think it's any less of a valid perspective. It's just a different one. I really do hope that what The Mandalorian is going to do, and I think what it's doing thus far, is bringing together people from all different corners of the Star Wars fandom. And saying this is a world where it kind of combines everything, and it's almost a home for everybody, where everybody's going to find something that they like. Whether you're more of a movie person like me, and even more of an original trilogy movie person, then you're going to find this part. If you like the books, we've got characters from the books. If you like the animated shows, we got characters from the animated shows, and we're all throwing them together in this universe. And I think that's great if they can balance out that storytelling, which they have been doing so far. But I think the other thing that is not the onus of anybody involved with The Mandalorian is that we as fans also have to make this an open tent and welcome everybody from the different parts of the Star Wars fandom. Because right now, Mandalorian is not turning me off anything Star Wars related. As a matter of fact, it is driving me to other things that are related to Star Wars. And it's been a long time since I could say that. Since I could say I saw anything in the Star Wars universe that made me want to ingest more Star Wars. Sadly, it's been a little while since that's happened. So I think that's where The Mandalorian so far is succeeding. And they took big steps towards that this week. So I'm 90 to 95% excited to see where we're going from here. 5 to 10% a little concerned that I'm going to feel like I have to do more research to fully get or understand the show. I really do think that what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau and everybody, the creative team behind the show, I really do think what they have done is to make The Mandalorian a place for Star Wars fans of all kinds to come together and enjoy what's happening. And I think that's great. And honestly, I think that's what Star Wars needs right now. One last note to make that just came to me while I was watching the movie, and as I'm seeing the child sitting here, is that beat on the boat when the child is just swallowed by that sea creature whose name I don't know, but I'm sure other people know. My first reaction, obviously, was to go like, oh no! But then my reptile brain kicked in, and I was just like, what if that was the end of the child? If that was just like, that's where the child's story ended, eaten by a sea beast. And then we go on to the adventures of the Mandalorian. There would have been rioting in the streets. There would have been a full-on revolt. Obviously, not the end of the child. As a matter of fact, we are heading now toward what seems to be an inevitable meeting with Ahsoka Tano as the Mandalorian continues to honor that pledge to deliver the child to the Jedi. What is going to happen? We don't know. Is next week the week when Ahsoka Tano is going to show up? We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Thank you so much for joining me as my mind rambles on the dying embers in the wee hours of the morning. And I really appreciate you watching. If you want to see even more of what I'm doing, please check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell, where we talk about not just Star Wars, but all kinds of movies. We have a monthly movie club. We have so many different things to do and have fun and take part in. We have a great Discord community. It's a lot of fun. I'd love to have you join me there. But thank you for watching here, and we'll see you next time.